Okay, Guraj, can you unmute yourself? Can you do it? Everybody unmute him, so I couldn't. Okay.
There, how's that?
There you go. Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good to see you. So you want to give us an update of the week?
Well, everything is good here, all things considered.
How's the smoke?
There's still, there's still lots of smoke here. Yeah, it's a big problem out here on the west coast of the United States with the forest fires. A lot of smoke this morning, but otherwise everyone's well here, and what? Still working with my book, with editing. Almost finished with the Sanskrit editing and some copy editing on the first section, first 6 chapters. So that's proceeding. And otherwise, taking care of the cows, worshiping Giriraj, going to Thai, Krishna and Balaram here also. No.
Last week you were making ghee and you were cooking a new sabji. Did you do
Yeah, yeah. Well, now we're planning out a cheese cave. We've got so much milk here. It's
cheese cake? Wow.
So Brindaranya has been, looking into the different cheeses and so forth, and it's quite a precise science to get it right. So anyway, one aspect of it is we need a cheese cave. So we're thinking how to go about that. Meanwhile, there are rounds of cheese waiting to go in the cave here. Milk, 2 refrigerators full of different milk in different stages of development, burfi and yogurt and curd and so forth. So
send some of it here.
Pardon?
I wish you could send some of it here.
Yeah, we probably could. We'll think about that.
Yeah.
Maybe as we perfect the cheeses, we'll be able to send some out. So
Are the cows affected by the smoke?
they don't seem to be affected by the smoke. I'm sure it's not good for their lungs any more than it is for ours, but they seem fine. But I'm staying healthy also. I have a good fair amount of activity, and I ride my bike for exercise, so that's good. All's well. What are the questions this morning?
Yeah, Tadas, you can go first. Unmute yourself.
Hey Krishna, can you hear me?
Yes. Hello.
Oh, yeah. Last week I was reading one article from Harmonist by you on Vande Shri Krishna Chaitanya, and there is one section about the dream of Srimati Radharani when she was dreaming Gauranga, and then she was asking Krishna about who was that the person in the dream, was he, she, or Krishna? She couldn't understand, and Krishna just laughed, and but his Kaustubha Mani gem started to glowing, and I just read, she understood from the joy of the, however, his Kaustubha Mani that he wears over the heart and which represents all jivas suddenly shone brightly, revealing to Radha the reason why Krishna only laughed. So basically, my question would be, could you tell something more about this aspect of that gem as a representation of the jivas? And the second part of the question would be, can we assume that our devotional, some kind of our devotional acts or our chanting makes that gem glowing more?
Mhm. Yeah, thank you for your question. The section of that article that you're citing is a reference from a work of short work of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. I can't recall the name of it right now, but I believe it is there in that place. And I'm not sure if that occurs anywhere else. I would look, but I don't have the time now in the context of answering your question in the immediate. Look as to whether that is referenced as such anywhere else. That is to say, that the gem, the Kaustubha Mani, represents all jivas, and that Krishna wears it close to his heart. That's again, I know that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has made that comment, and the dream Leela that's being referred to there is also from a work of his, again, the name of which I forget. But I don't know of anything else offhand, as I'm saying, that further describes the Kaustubha Mani in that way, and it may be described in other ways, in other places as well. The context here, of course, is Radharani dreaming and envisioning Krishna as Gaur Krishna. And in that particular Leela, of course, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the embodiment of Krishna in the mood of Radha. Radha is sometimes referred to as the compassionate nature of Krishna, and he is tendering, to the world, what with the dissemination of the gift of Braj Bhakti, and he has been described by others as most magnanimous, most compassionate, and so forth. There is the argument, of course, that Krishna's compassion, which is one of his transcendental qualities, extends only to his devotees because he only lives within the circle of his Swarup Shakti. His Leela is conducted only within the influence and the circle of his Swarup Shakti, not outside of it. We find ourselves, conditioned souls, outside of it. So his compassion doesn't extend in the immediate to that, beyond those limits, because he doesn't go beyond those limits. But nonetheless, of course, his devotees do, and so they're considered his Kripa Shakti. Bhakti goes to them, even though Krishna doesn't. And then when Bhakti goes there, Krishna has to go there. But in the case of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, of course, he's Krishna, but he's Krishna in the mood of a devotee. So there's a compassionate side to him that's emphasized. And we find him even in Chaitanya Charitamrita expressing compassion for the Bada Jivas, even in the forms of trees and other lower forms of life, less complex forms of life. And he ponders or expresses concern whether his method of Nam Sankirtan, will be sufficient to deliver them. So he's expressing compassion for them. Of course, Haridas responds, you shouldn't worry about that when you chant. And you hear the echo, that's not really an echo, that's the non-moving living entities chanting back. So the implication being they're also going to be benefited. So the idea here that I'm emphasizing is that we do see extraordinary compassion in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And this Leela that Radha is experiencing in a dream, being about that Krishna in this compassionate form, assuming her own nature, she's the compassionate nature of Krishna, and so forth. In that context, then there's this reference to the Kastubamani representing all jewels. Again, I don't know if it's said so anywhere else, but I think suffice to say that there's evidence from the way I'm speaking about it in support of the idea that that the jewel, resting as it does over Krishna's heart, represents all jivas. What else can we say about it? I really don't have any other references to support that or extend the understanding, whether or not there's a glow brighter is your second question when devotees take up devotional service. Well, Krishna has, of course, unlimited capacity to enjoy and accept service. But that said, the nature of prema, while it is ever increasing, it's full, I should say, but ever increasing at the same time. So I suppose you could say that the more, the merrier, and perhaps it shines brighter. But these are only poetic ways of speaking about the fact that Krishna has a compassionate heart, really, and in the form of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, it's extended. Apparently, it would seem beyond the limits of Krishna's, Brajanandan Krishna's compassion, because here in this Leela, he's taking the role of a devotee, and the devotees are the Kripa Shakti of Krishna. So I think that all this is, like I say, it's a poetic way of speaking about this philosophical point. And so we get encouraged by this, that the jivas like ourselves are not outside of the concern and compassionate heart of Krishna. Does that help?
Yeah. So it wouldn't be an offense to meditate on that glowing gem while you chant japa.
No, it wouldn't be offense to think about any of Krishna's ornaments while chanting. And there's probably some other book that speaks about somebody who's personified form of the Kastubamani. And when the Ramanuja Sampradaya, the different weapons of Vishnu are all personified as the alwars. So there are many different angles of vision on, and as long as they fit within the parameters of the tattva, they have there's truth to them. So yeah, any of the ornaments of Krishna are worshipable.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Okay, Sharda, you want to ask your question?
Pranams, Maharaj.
Right.
I was reading
Okay.
Pranams. Hare Krishna. I was reading with relish last night the Shishashtakam, and I need to, like, it might be a stupid question, but I might like to clarify in my mind about the progression. You have Ruchi and Nishta and these stages. Now, if there is a soul that, if by the mercy of Krishna is born, a jiva is born into any planet, who is at a different stage, not at the beginning, is that possible? And can we say that they are not conditioned souls, that they are something higher? Or can we say anything about that type of jiva who is born and appears to then be in, say, in a middle stage, already has taste for Namasankirtan? Can you elaborate on a being like that? What they would be like?
Well, there's an important point regarding bhakti. In contrast to karma or jnana as paths or yoga, karma tends to be more of a path of material acquisition. And we know that the results of karma, the fruits, are temporary. right?
Mm.
So you could get
Yeah.
good karma and a good result from doing a good deed, but that good karma and the reward, so to speak, will expire at a certain point. So the results
Yeah.
within the karma mark are temporary, and karma is governed by the Rajagun. Now, if you go from karma to Gyan and yoga, these are governed by sattva. Hmm? And
Right.
so their pursuit is knowledge rather than things. Hmm? And uh, knowledge requires giving up things because attachment is ignorance and the cause of suffering. But yoga and Gyan are governed by sattva. The symptom of sattva is Gyan, knowledge, and corresponding attachment. But still, that's within the gunas. Hmm? So you have Rajaguna governing karma, Sattva guna governing Jnana and yoga, and the knowledge that's derived from those practices. Now, bhakti is nirguna, because bhakti is that which makes the spiritual world go round. Radharani is sometimes referred to as Bhakti Devi, so the goddess of bhakti, and Krishna, she's Krishna's dancing teacher, teaching him how to dance. So, because bhakti is nirguna, the results that we acquire by engaging in bhakti are not temporary.
Right. Right.
Therefore, if we progress to a certain stage, let's say we progress to nishta, and we leave the world, then we will take birth again, and we'll pick up at the stage of nishta. So sometimes we find souls like this that seem to hit the ground running, so to speak, with regard to spiritual interest, and they seem to progress more quickly. What will happen in that instance is, for the most part, they will when they take birth in this world again and take up bhakti, they'll go through the first stages very, very quickly.
Right.
And then come to the stage where they left off, and then the work begins again.
Right.
So
Right.
there's not a requirement for them to go to some other loka, so to speak, and earth is most conducive, for that matter, for bhakti. So according to the Gita, depending on how much progress they've made in the sixth canon of the Gita, this question is addressed. If they aren't successful, they can go to a celestial realm and stay there for some time, and then they'll take birth on earth and pick up where they left off.
Right.
So the interesting thing there, of course, is that they can go to a celestial realm by doing bhakti imperfectly, which you could only get to through karma by doing it perfectly.
Right.
By doing the karma perfectly right, you can get the corresponding result. By doing bhakti imperfectly, you can get the perfection of the karma mark, and then take birth again on earth in a pious family, suitable for bhakti. And the Gita goes on to say that if one is more advanced but doesn't perfect himself or herself, they'll take birth in a Vaishnava family or a family of transcendentalists. And then they pick up where they left off. In other words, the yoga, the bhakti samskars that they've acquired, they'll be there as a favorable wind to carry them.
Yeah.
Some of the results that we will derive from bhakti also won't come immediately. So they'll be there and accrue, they'll be there in the next life. So you pick up, so to speak, where you left off. So some souls may seem very advanced, and therefore we determine, oh, they practiced bhakti in the previous lives they've acquired. What I'm trying to acquire in this life, in their previous life. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps. And you're saying that this earth is more conducive for bhakti, cultivating bhakti, this earth, rather than other planets. Is that right?
There are some realms mentioned in the scripture that are suitable for spiritual practice, for brahmacharis, for example, who have overcome the sexual desire. They may go to Tapalok, Yanlok, Sitloka, and so forth. And they are planets that are for realms for intense spiritual practice.
Right.
In one sense, they're more conducive. There's an idea within Buddhism that one can go to the planet of the Amitabha Buddha by chanting his name, and then everybody there is a Buddha, so it's easy to go from there to nirvana. So it's a similar idea.
Right.
But
Yeah.
but Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's dispensation, particularly on earth, appearing here, and so forth. So I would think it more conducive
Right.
in a sense. Whereas, because this is a particular, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's is a particular dispensation, a particular practice to go to a particular realm in Braj Bhakti, whereas the tapasvis, the gyanis, the brahmacharis, the yogis, and so forth, they're kind of aiming for mukti or some type of Vaikuntha mukti. They don't have Braj Bhakti in mind, so to speak. So it's not something that is where there are a number of devotees performing Sankirtan, regularly compared to Earth. So I think it's a little more friendly here.
Good.
And
Thank you.
we see great devotees born here. Prabhupada described himself as several times as having been not perfected his practice in the previous life and taking birth in a Vaishnava family on earth. That's how he described himself repeatedly. So there are other examples.
Yeah, thank you. That's helped. Thank you.
Okay.
Made it clear. Hare Krishna.
Krishna Chaitanya.
Hare Krishna.
Hari Ram.
Haribol. I have,
Hari.
as often, this question may be kind of jumbled, but I'll just throw this out there that I'm wondering about. Has to do with the prakat and aprakat leelas. And I was just thinking, I know, for instance, in your upcoming book, you have a section that kind of talks about the prakat leela and a section that talks about the daily leela. And we sing the song, the Gora Asta, that song, but also a way into the Gora Leela is said to be the Madhya Leela, which is a Prakat Leela. And I'm just wondering, as far as like maybe different functions that becoming familiar with these, either the daily and or Prakat Leela may play in the devotees' lives at different stages, like I guess sadhakas, for instance, and or it's talked about that I guess a goal is to be born into the Prakat Leela. And just to add on to that, is really the Prakat and Aprakat Leelas different Leelas or just different aspects of the eternal inconceivable Leela?
Well, the Aprakat Leela means it's the invisible Leela, and the Prakat Leela means where it becomes visible to everybody in some respects. Of course, you have to have the right eyes to see it properly, but even if you see Krishna improperly, you're seeing him in the Prakat Leela in ways that you cannot see him in his Aprakat Leela. So the Prakat Leela is a special dispensation, manifest Leela within the world, for the jivas and for the sadhakas who Krishna cannot, who are advanced enough that Krishna can't bear their separation anymore. So he appears for them to collect them up, so to speak. So the Prakat Leela will be especially dear to us and relevant, and at the same time, it's kind of a trailer to the movie of the Aprakat Leela. So it entices us, lets us know that such a Leela exists, it's available to enter into, and so forth. And as you say, it becomes an entry point, the principal portal into the Aprakat Leela. it's not necessarily the only portal, because we see in the example of Brihad Bhagavatamrita, Gopakumar tells his story of how he entered the Aprakat Lila in Goloka, and he didn't take birth in the Prakat Lila, but he was living in Braj, and there he envisioned the Lila, which is going on invisibly in Vrindavan, even when Krishna's Prakat Lila is not manifest. Krishna's Lila may be manifest in another universe. One could be living in Braj in this universe, like now, the Prakat Lila is not manifest here, but invisibly within Braj, that Lila is not the Prakat Lila, but the Aprakat Lila is going on. So one can gain a glimpse of it through bhajan. In Vrindavan in particular, there are certain features about the Dham on earth that can be seen with the right eyes, devotional eyes, that are described in the different Puranas and so forth. So it's a special sacred geographical location that transcends geographical boundaries, even while it appears to fit within them. And the Leela can be experienced there to practitioners in ways that would be invisible to others around them. And so Gopakumar had that experience, as his student Jana Sharma did as well. And through that, they went to the Aprakat Leela. So taking birth in the Prakat Leela is the norm, but there may be exceptions. And the norm, we see examples. So the sages of Dandakaranya, they were pursuing Gopi Bhav, and they took birth in the Prakat Leela. They personified, certain Upanishads personified, aspired for this ideal. They took birth in the Prakat Leela. There are other individual examples mentioned in different places. Those were groups that went. So there's evidence for that. The Prakat Leela is very special. It's like a meeting between the transcendence and the mundane, between time and eternity. Just like our sadhaka deha, practitioner's body, is like that as well. The Prakat Leela has been described in that way, also similar. So it's very special to us, and it's the first expression of the Leela to contemplate, to become familiar with, to learn about Krishna, and so forth. Now, books like Govinda Lilamrita, the song that you mentioned, Astaka Lila, Smaranam, Gora, of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Eternal Lila, these are visions of the authors of these poems into the Aprakat Lila, while on earth practicing and so forth. They have visions, and then they're putting in the pen. The whole Govinda Lilamrita, for example, is really Krishnadas Kaviraja's meditation. We see in there he repeatedly mentions Kasturi Manjari, and mentions her, for the most part, following the Tulsi Manjari or Rati Manjari, two names of the same devotee, Raghunath Das Goswami, who in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Krishnadas identifies as his guru. So his mention repeatedly of Kasturi Manjari, and often in conjunction with Tulsi Manjari, I think the wise devotees thereafter came to the conclusion, oh, he's Kasturi Manjari. He's projecting himself and seeing himself in his meditation. So this is aprakat. I mean, it's invisible in that sense. It's aprakat. And also the nature of the aprakat lila described, for example, in Govinda Lilamrita, or that song that you mentioned about Gaura's eternal lila. It's a certain kind of, like if you were to take, for example, Krishna lila and develop it from his Kumar lila to his Poganda lila, from his childhood to his boyhood to his adolescence, and just before he goes to Mathura, stop the cameras right there and freeze that picture. freeze that picture, and then look deeply within that picture what could go on in a typical day in the life of Krishna as an adolescent before going to Mathura, a typical day. And this is what Govinda Lilamrita, Krishna Bhavanamrita, Vishwanath Chakravarti describes. So that is really, I would look at that as a meditation on the apricot lila, because it's not something that's recorded, for example, in the Bhagavatam as the prakat lila. It doesn't contain elements of the prakat lila like slaying different demons and so forth, which is more characteristic of the apricot lila. There's no separation like we find in the apricot lila, where Krishna goes away to Mathura and Dwarka for a long time. So the apricot lila is characterized by union. The prakat lila is characterized more by separation. So these songs, or these poems, and texts and so forth, these are kind of a meditation on the apricot lila. Now, when one becomes familiar with the prakat lila, then, as I say, that's a good beginning. Then, in due course, as one's ability to practice, one's eligibility increases, one's adhikar, and particularly with regard to smaranam, then the apricot lila becomes more relevant, because in the meditation, one will meditate following the lead of these types of texts and so forth. Now, the interesting thing, of course, is that preoccupation where one starts to meditatively project one's self in a siddharupa into the lila, into the apricot lila, results ultimately in taking birth, for the most part, in the prakat lila, right? But the purpose of that is to acquire or to further develop the sthayi bhav that's been perfected in one's practitioner's life in terms of attaining prema, but still further developments of that sthayi bhav relative to lila have not developed, and they would be difficult to develop outside of having the association of the associates of Krishna who have fully developed those sthayi bhavs in terms of man, sneha, pranay, raga, anuraga, mahabhav, and so forth, relative to the different rasas or the different sthayi bhavs. And so by the hands-on association there, one qualifies oneself by developing further his or her sthayi bhav, and then go to the apricot lila once and for all. So there's an initial familiarity with the prakat lila, leads to a familiarity with the apricot lila, leads typically to taking birth in the prakat lila, leads to entering into the apricot lila, and never returning from there. That's typically the progression, and so there's this kind of hard form of the apricot lila, goloka, right? And there's like a softer form of it where it manifests to devotees, for example, practitioners doing their practice in Braj. Or if they can't live in Vrindavan, they could live there in their mind, and they could set up a temple at Madhuvan and take a stone from Govardhan and place it there, and so forth. And then this is an extended way of living in Vrindavan, which is powerful, a powerful form of very powerful anga of bhakti. And so the result of it is, one of the results of it is that one can have glimpses of the lila, the invisible apricot lila. So that would be different. Those visions are different than the prakat lila, which is a particular manifestation of the lila on earth. Krishna actually comes and taking birth. If in my meditation I experience Krishna lila, I'm not entering the prakat lila. I'm experiencing the prakat lila. So it has a way of expressing itself as well in this world, and particularly in relation to the Dham and the idea of living there and living in that consciousness. And again, but those visions typically, and absorption would lead to taking birth in the Prakat Leela. Although as again, the exception is there, for Gopakumar, he went directly to the Prakat Leela. So that's also possible. But the argument of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is that it's practically impossible to develop this intensification of the Sthayi Bhav without a hands-on association of those who are so developed. And we do find in the Bhagavatam the example in the Prakat Leela of devotees developing further. So, for example, the typical example is the gopis who took birth. Krishna played his flute, called them. They came, but some of them could not come. They were checked by their husbands. So this checking by their husbands caused separation to increase. And if we read further in the Bhagavatam, when Uddhava comes to Vrindavan, those particular gopis are mentioned. They're said to have died earlier, but they died to anything that was inhibiting them from having the full union with Krishna. So there is an example of devotees progressing within perfection, so to speak, as much as prema is perfection, within perfection, progressing and developing in order to enter the Prakat Leela once and for all. So you can see this is a very particular idea that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was given, a particular method, a very particular destination in transcendence, which is variegated by nature. So it's good to be acquainted with the goal and the method, theoretically. Does that help?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, I think you didn't really have a question, just wanted me to speak about it a little bit more, so glad I could be helpful.
Thank you.
Okay. I have a question, and it's probably a really not very, anyway, I'll ask it. I was just reading the verse about Kayami Sanatan Goswami asking Lord Chaitanya, who am I? And Lord Chaitanya responding, Jivara Swarupai Krishna Dinchadas. And so it just brought up a little bit of questions that is he speaking directly to Sanatan Goswami because of his the identity he has? Is he speaking in general to all of mankind, that this is your Sarup, and meaning Sarup, because it almost implies some kind of inherency to me, and maybe that's my question, is how does it not?
Yeah, I understand your question. So Sanatana Goswami meets Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and has a conversation with him, and he's very humble. And he says, Kayami kene, jarta patrai. Kayami, who am I? Kene, why? Tapa, try. Why try the miseries, threefold miseries of material existence I have to suffer from? Kayami kene, jarta patrai. And then Mahaprabhu begins to explain, right? So the questions of Sanatana Goswami are very, very basic. Who am I? Why do I have to suffer? This is not asking about the prayojan tattva, the goal. There are not questions about rasa tattva. That's not the subject here. Very basic questions. Who am I? Why do I have to suffer? I think I'm a pandit, but I don't even know the answers to the. People call me a pandit. Gramya, what is he? The village people call me a pandit, but I don't know who I am. What is my position? And I don't want to suffer, but I suffer. So Mahaprabhu is addressing like new devotees here, kind of answer. It's not about what your Swarup in Goloka Vrindavan is, or what the nature of Rasa Tattva and so forth. So in the context of answering, one of the things that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu teaches Sanatana Goswami is Jivera Swarupa Hoy Krishna Nitya Das. Jivera Swarup Hoy. The Swarup of the jiva, Krishnera, jivera, of the jiva, his nature, Swarup, Nitya, Krishna, Das, is eternally subordinate, it means, to Krishna. Das means servant. So what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was explaining is the nature of the jiva. Krishna is the enjoyer. The jiva is the servant. There's a difference between the two. The jiva and Brahman are not one in all respects. For example, as Mayavad teaches, jiva is Brahman. No, he's saying there's a difference. Who are you? You're a jiva. And the jiva is different from Bhagawan. Bhagawan doesn't suffer from the threefold miseries. Even if he comes to this world, he comes within the orbit of his Swarup Shakti. He's not suffering. He has no ignorance, therefore he has no suffering. Ignorance being attachment, which causes suffering. But you're a jiva. The jiva is different from Bhagawan. One way to speak broadly about the difference is Krishna is the enjoyer, the jiva is the servant, the server, right? And of course he goes on in his teaching, and I think he maybe even uses the word Veda Bed there, Tatastakya. So this is what he's describing. This is Sambandha Gyan. This is not like a discourse on Prayojan Tattva, even on Bhakti, Abhideya as the means, but Sambandha Gyan. And he's basically saying, again, the nature of the jiva is subordinate to Krishna. Sometimes we say, Krishna is the supreme enjoyer, Ekala Ishwar Krishna, Ar Sabhritya. Ekala Ishwar Krishna. There's only one Krishna, who's the one Ishwar, that's Krishna. Ar Sabhritya. Sabhritya. Everyone else is Britya, servant. Does that mean everyone is in Dasya Ras? It's not dealing with that subject. That's another thing. So the word Swarup, the more broad and commonly used, the way the word is used is to speak about nature, one's nature. Now we have a Bhakti Swarup. That's another thing. A Swarup that is as a result of being infused with Bhakti in a particular way, and an identity arises out of this, and you can participate in that, in the Leela and so forth. But generally, the Jiva has a Swarup independent of any Bhakti. Even if the Jiva is not infused with Bhakti, it has a Swarup, it has a nature. What is its nature? Subordinate to Krishna. It's the servant, and Krishna is the served. This is what he's teaching there. It's very, very, very broad. Not teaching about this, the internal Swarup that a jiva can acquire. Otherwise, he would be saying every jiva is in Dasya Rasa. Well, that's obviously not what the teaching is. So you have to look and see the context of how the word Swarup is being used to overcome these types of confusions that a lot of devotees, it comes up for them because they're used to thinking of the word Swarup as an eternal form in relation to Krishna, which is one application of the word. But that's a very specific application of the word and how it's used in Gaudiya Vaishnavism with regard to the prayojan, the goal, the ideal. Otherwise, very commonly within Gaudiya Vaishnavism, it's used otherwise. Speak of the nature of the jiva. It's tatasta. And again, here it's subordinate to Krishna. So why do I have to, who am I? Why I have to suffer? Well, you're not Krishna. He doesn't have to suffer. He's the only enjoyer. Everyone else is subordinate. And, he goes on to explain further. But the fact that we're not the supreme enjoyer, well, then we're serving. If we don't serve, then we're going to have to suffer, because we're acting against our swarup, against our nature, right? Does that help?
It helps, yes, but it just brings up one more question. So, yeah, understanding that it's sort of just means kind of like how Prabhupada used the term dharma. The dharma of the jiva is service. And,
Exactly.
but thinking about what about the jiva that, you know, Brahmananda, that, you know, just could live in the Brahmajyoti without serving, and that would be an eternal just place for them, and so without any service. And that, so again, yeah, so that would just be another little confusion.
Well, you have dasya which is active service. You have shantarasa, which is kind of like a passive adoration. So one of the distinctions between dasya and sakyarasa is the actual active serving takes place in dasya. And shantarasa is characterized by attachment to Krishna and detachment from material life. So it's, you know, it's almost, it's difficult to almost think about bhakti rasa, shantarasa, as service. It's passive adoration. Now, merging in the Brahmajyoti, Brahma Sahuja, that's an even lesser ideal from our vantage point, but it doesn't change the fact that the jiva there is subordinate to Brahman. The jiva doesn't become Brahman. Again, if the jiva merges into the Brahmajyoti, what happens? Okay, there's methods for that. It loses a sense of its individuality. That becomes obscured in the face of Brahman, and it's just identified with Brahman. Now, that's not too hard to understand if you think what happens to you to the jiva in material life. The jiva in material life becomes absorbed in the external energy. And it thinks itself to be the picture of itself that on the mirror of material energy. And it's not. But so in Brahmajyoti, it's identified with Brahman and loses a sense of its individuality, but it's still an individual. You go to the other side, go to into the Leela, and the jiva is completely immersed in the Swarup Shakti. So it identifies entirely with the Swarup Shakti and functions like everyone else, even those that are manifestations of the Swarup Shakti itself. The fact that it's a tatastha is no longer an issue. It's still a tatastha jiva. It's infused with bhakti, with the Swarup Shakti. But it hasn't changed its constitution. So because the jiva enters into Brahma Sutra, doesn't mean it became Brahman. If it became Brahman, then it would change its constitution. But what Mahaprabhu's teaching is that's not what occurs. It's always subordinate. It's subordinate to Brahman. But its sense of subordination or superiority or anything, these don't come into consideration. You're just absorbed in Brahman. Okay.
Yeah, so that the word service would be subordination would be more the word that would apply to the jiva that ends up in the Brahmajyoti. He wouldn't, because there is no real.
Again, service here means subordinate. It doesn't necessarily mean active service. That he's a subordinate entity to Krishna. He's not the enjoyer. He's not Brahman. He's
Let me hold on. Let me just mute everybody. Yeah, maybe he did. Okay.
He's constitutionally a servant. I mean, you can say he ornaments Brahman. So that's his service. Ornamenting Brahman.
Okay, Smarte has a question.
Okay.
I have two unrelated questions. One related to Archana's question. Once somebody does merge into the Brahma Jyoti, is that an eternal position? Where I kind of remember hearing that Prabhupada said one may become bored in that situation and come back to the material
Yeah, there's
realm.
no question of coming back because it's mukti. So mukti means liberated, and it's a form of perfection. So there's no imperfection. There's no question of being bored with Brahman, because Brahman's unlimited. Maybe Prabhupada sometimes said things like that. He was very much always lambasting against the idea of entering into Brahman because it's so much identified with Mayavad philosophy, even though there are others who enter outside of Mayavad philosophy and it is attainable. It's not something of interest to the devotees at all. And so that said, there is the possibility, and there are verses to this effect, that in this body, a jnani, for example, who attains the stage of jivan mukta, so he's liberated in this body, it means is all this karma that was waiting to manifest as prarabdha has all been destroyed. And the prarabdha karma is remaining and it's playing itself out. And he's just waiting for that to finish, and then he enters into Brahma Sahuja. So that's the penultimate stage before the final stage of perfection. And from that stage, which is, again, it's a form of mukti, kind of, he can fall down. There are verses like this in Bhagavatam, Arikachena Paramapadam Tadapatanti Adho, Nadata Yushmadangraya, Avishuddhabhudaya, Vimuktamanina. He thinks he's liberated, but because he offends bhakti, it says, he falls down. Now, there's no opportunity to offend bhakti when you're merged in the Brahma Jyoti. There's no activity going on there, just this pulsating, I am. So that can occur in the penultimate stage. So sometimes verses like that are referred to as falling from Brahman, but it's falling from that penultimate stage. Once you enter into the Brahma Jyoti, then there it's final. However, it is said that you can go up from there. That's possible. Now, even when it's said you can go up from there, for the most part, that refers to from the stage of the Jivan Mukta. So let's say a Jivan Mukta comes in touch with a powerful devotee. A Jivan Mukta in the Gyan Marg comes in touch with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and then from there develops affinity for Nirgun Bhakti. So that's obviously a possibility. Theoretically, there's the possibility that you could even enter into Brahman and go up. There's no coming down, but there's a possibility. How do you go up? By the grace of Krishna. How you get the grace of Krishna? Well, let me give an example. Let's say you were a Jivan Mukta. Let's say I was a Jivan Mukta. And I met you and I inspired you to take up the life of a transcendentalist. And so many basic ideas about Vedanta and so forth, you learned from me and were inspired. You're not the body, and there's reincarnation, and how to control the mind and the senses, and so forth. Even Krishna's a form of God, and so forth. You learned all these things from me, but you learned it through the filter of the Gyan Marg. Then I passed away, and you were always thankful to me, grateful. You have such a soft spot in your heart. Meanwhile, you meet some very powerful, strong devotees, and they build upon what you've learned, and they also do away with things that you might have mislearned from the bhakti perspective, even from that fellow, from me, and as an example. So you become a devotee of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and you become advanced, and you have some affinity for me because I helped you in the beginning. So Krishna plucks me out of the Brahma Jyoti and takes me to, by your grace, it's possible. How Krishna will know about that jiva and why would he liberate him? Well, his devotee has some affinity for him. There's a psychology of love. If you care for somebody, and Krishna cares about you, then those that you care about, Krishna will also care about. Naturally, you will go to them. Go to your relatives, even friends, and so forth. In some respect, it'll be good for them. Good for everyone you know and like. It'll be good for you. Good for them. If you become the more you become a devotee. So similarly for that guru who entered into Brahman, you can deliver him. And when he ends up in Goloka, you'll be touching his feet, worshiping him.
Okay, thank you. My other question is, I was listening to your lecture about I think it was the cleansing of the Gundicha temple. And in one place you mentioned that Krishna and Balaram going to Kurukshetra was given as an example of Lord Jagannath going to Gundicha. I mean, I guess Jagannath and Balaram and Subhadra going to Gundicha. Was, and then later on in the talk, you were saying how Lord Jagannath going to Gundicha was Krishna going to Vrindavan.
Right. Well, when Krishna goes to Kurukshetra, he goes to Vrindavan. Because, why? He goes to Kurukshetra and the inhabitants of Vrindavan also come there. And there he meets them again after a long time. He meets his mother, some friends, and father. He meets with the gopis separately. And he expresses to them, well, why don't you come with me? And they said, no, you come to Vrindavan. We can't leave Vrindavan. We want you in Vrindavan. And so that Milan, Yugal Milan, meeting between Radha and Krishna in Kurukshetra is really more what Kurukshetra is about from our perspective than the Kurukshetric war and the whole Bhagavad Gita. As I've said in my commentary in the Gita, Krishna's on the field of Kurukshetra speaking about Dharma to Arjuna. He has to remember that he met there earlier in Kurukshetra, met the gopis, and what lesson did he learn about Dharma from them? So that has to come through the Gita slightly when he's speaking to Arjuna, at least in a covert way. So, going to Kurukshetra, but meeting the inhabitants of Vrindavan is what it's all about. And I think that's what the chapter of the Bhagavatam, at least in Prabhupada's translation, is entitled. But anyway, that's the key point. That's the main thing. So meeting with them is tantamount to going to Vrindavan, is the point. He gets to Kurukshetra, he meets the gopis. They're calling him to come back to Vrindavan. So when Jagannath goes to the Gundicha temple, externally, you could look at it as Kurukshetra, internally as Vrindavan, because the inhabitants of Vrindavan are there. And that's really the main event. Now, it depends who you are, what you think the main event is going to be. Other people are saying Krishna riding on an elephant, and Balaram think this is the main event. The prince is here, the prince is here. Meanwhile, Mother Yasoda's knocking on the door and saying, let us in. And the gatekeepers in the village that's been like an Olympic village has been set up. Who are you people? This is the prince here, Prince Krishna. And Ram, who are you cowherd people? What are you? And we want to see him. He's my. What do you mean? He's the son of Devaki. Who are you? Anyway, she's persistent, so they send word back to Krishna. There's this lady here says she's your mother. Oh, he said, let her in. So, what's really going on there depends, what your angle of vision is. From the Gaudiya perspective, there's this meeting between the inhabitants and Krishna, particularly with Radha and the gopis, and there Krishna makes a statement. He says that he says people worship me for things, and people worship me for liberation, to get away from things. People worship me because I should be worshipped, but I worship you. I'm the way you worship me. I'm completely purchased. I cannot repay. I worship you. So this is the Vrindavan talk. This is not Prince Krishna anymore. His princehood has been he's been dethroned, so to speak. There. Krishna ki jai. Radhe. So I see a short question about Purushottam Mas. I talked about this a couple of times. There's nothing that I'm aware of in the Goswami's literature itself about Purushottam Mas. There is emphasis on observance of Kartik, which is the fourth of the 4 months of the Chaturmasya. Purushottam Mas is like the fifth, like a leap year type of month in the Chaturmasya 4-month rainy season. That said, Bhakti Vinod has written about it and the virtues of it, and he quoted from, I think, maybe Brihad Naradiya Purana statements of Krishna there, but some of the statements there, they contradict some of the statements of the Goswamis. There it said, well, the only transcendental month is Purushottam Mas, all the others only have material results by observing the vows connected with them, which certainly wouldn't be the case for Kartik Mas, the month of Kartik. So perhaps for that reason, the Goswamis didn't emphasize Purushottam Mas, but there are basic statements about the observance, the virtues of it, and largely in connection with Krishna Bhakti. So it's a way in which the scriptures have taken an opportunity to encourage ordinary people to practice Krishna Bhakti in the Purushottam Mas, or for devotees to increase their devotion. There are statements like during the Purushottam Mas, you have to give 14 cakes of ghee and a gold ring to a qualified Brahmin. Otherwise, everything else you've done through all the other 12 months is useless. Obviously, that doesn't pertain to devotees. So a lot of these kind of statements are to get people, give them a reason beyond the so many reasons that are already there that are good for doing bhakti. Another reason to do bhakti, do it this 1 month anyway, and then if you can't do it all the month, do this 1 month. And then for then some devotees have taken it in such a way as to be an opportunity to increase the devotion and get more benefit. But whenever you increase your donation, your devotion, you're going to get more benefit from it. Whether particular times are conducive to that, perhaps, and this is the way that month is talked about. So increase your hearing and chanting for the month of Purushottam, no harm. But if you don't, you're already hearing and chanting, you're already doing what the month prescribes, among other things. And so I mentioned before, my Gurumush never mentioned it. Sridhar Maharaj never mentioned it to us. It's not mentioned by the Goswamis. There are a couple of verses, I think, in the Hari Bhakti Vilas, but the one I mentioned about like giving away so much ghee to a Brahmin, so forth. So, Purushottam Mas ki jai. All right, so let's see. Since somebody has written here, here's an interesting quote. I think it's Padmanabha's, yes. Here's an interesting quote from Prabhupada on someone attaining Brahman and remaining there. He says, since the Lord is very kind to everyone, the impersonalists who accept bhakti as a means of merging in the existence of the Lord and his impersonal Brahmajyoti are also awarded their desired destination. Therefore, Krishna is very kind. He gives them. Yeah. Do they have that kind of samskar from those kind of sadhus who have that ideal? Then And that's a powerful ideal. The mukshatva, the desire for that kind of mukti, has to be stronger than all material desires. So it's a very strong desire that's cultivated. It's difficult to counteract that. To be a very powerful devotee to convert someone like that, who's cultivating mukshatva, the desire to emerge into Brahman, and in retiring material desires for that aim, and sleeping on a bed of nails. So difficult to convert them. If they want to go there, they can go. It's a liberated form. But we say comparatively to the possibilities in bhakti that you should determine now through Shastra, there's a better possibility, and pursue that. And it's easier to pursue. You don't have to sleep on a bed of nails. Shri Bhakti Devi ki jai. Okay, nice to talk with you all.
Thank you so much for your wonderful association. And next week, hopefully.
Yes, hopefully. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Gurudev.
Jai.